The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, shattering the quiet of my Saturday morning. I glanced at the screen. Grandma Evelyn. That wasn't unusual. She called every now and then to chat about her garden, a new recipe she'd tried, or a funny story about the nosy neighbors. But today felt different. "Hey, Evelyn," I answered, keeping it casual. "What's up?" There was a long pause on the other end, just the faint sound of her breath, and maybe the crackle of an old corded phone. "Jake, I need you to come over," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it, like she'd been rehearsing this sentence for hours. "Today, if you can." I frowned. "Is everything okay?" It's important. Emily doesn't need to know. Just you." Emily was my wife and Evelyn's granddaughter. We'd been married 5 years, and while the honeymoon phase was long over, we'd settled into a routine of shared grocery runs, Netflix binges, and the occasional fight over who left the laundry in the dryer. "Sure," I said cautiously. "What's this about?" "I'll tell you when you get here." She hung up before I could push further. By the time I pulled into her driveway, unease had settled into the pit of my stomach. Evelyn's house was a snapshot of classic Americana, a white clapboard exterior with green shutters, a perfectly manicured lawn, and a front porch swing that creaked even when no one was sitting in it. She met me at the door wearing a cardigan over her floral blouse, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked like someone who'd just baked cookies, but her eyes were harder than usual, the kind of sharp that could cut glass. "Thanks for coming, Jake," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I've made tea." "Tea?" I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "This sounds serious. Should I be worried?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't laugh. We sat at her kitchen table, where a pot of Earl Grey steamed between us. The tension was palpable. I stirred my cup unnecessarily, waiting for her to start. "Jake," she said finally, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "I've always believed in family, even when it's difficult. Do you understand what I mean?" I nodded cautiously. "When people you love hurt you, or hurt each other, it's not easy to face. But I've learned you can't look the other way forever." I stayed silent, my grip tightening on the teacup. "Something's been troubling me for a while," she continued, her voice trembling now. "I've seen things, I've heard things, and I've tried to give Emily the benefit of the doubt. She's my granddaughter, after all, but—" She paused, her eyes piercing mine. "I know about the affair." The word hit me like a sucker punch. My stomach dropped, the room suddenly suffocating. "Evelyn," I started, my voice cracking. Don't lie to me," she snapped, the kind of command that only comes from a lifetime of being the family matriarch. "I've been on this earth for 73 years, Jake. I know what I've seen." Her words hung in the air as my mind raced. How much did she know? Did she mean me and Emily, or Emily and someone else? "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said weakly. She raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "I found the text messages." My heart stopped. "They weren't even hidden well," she added, her voice laced with bitterness. "On her phone, plain as day. I wasn't snooping." She left it in the kitchen when she went to the bathroom. The silence stretched, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "Jake, I saw your name. I saw what she wrote. I know what you've been doing." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My mind was a whirlwind of panic, denial, and a faint, desperate hope that I could salvage this. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" she demanded. I set the teacup down carefully, avoiding her gaze. "Evelyn, I don't know what to say." "Try the truth," she said, leaning forward. "That might be a good place to start." Her eyes bored into me, unrelenting, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. I swallowed hard. "It's complicated," she scoffed. "Complicated? Jake, you're married to my granddaughter. She trusted you. I trusted you." The weight of her words was unbearable. I stood up, pacing the small kitchen, trying to figure out how to explain myself. "Evelyn, I know I messed up," I admitted finally. "But Emily and our marriage, it's not as perfect as it seems. Things happened, and I didn't mean for it to." "Don't you dare try to justify this," she interrupted, her voice rising. "You think I don't know what a hard marriage looks like? You think I didn't face temptations of my own? But I never betrayed the people who trusted me. I turned to her, stunned. I'd never seen Evelyn like this, her composed exterior cracking under the strain of her disappointment. Do you know what this will do to her? She asked, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Do you have any idea how much it will hurt her? I couldn't answer. Jake, she said, her voice trembling again, I didn't call you here to punish you. I called you here because I need to know if this family can survive what you and Emily have done. Her words hit harder than any accusation. This wasn't just about me and Emily anymore. It was about Evelyn, about the family dinners we'd all shared, about the trust that held us together. And I had no idea how to fix it. The room felt smaller now, as though the walls were closing in with every passing second. Evelyn sat rigid at the table, her fingers interlaced tightly, knuckles white. I leaned against the counter, staring at the floor, unsure whether to sit back down or bolt for the door. I need to hear it from you, she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but there was a sharpness to it, an edge that warned me against evasion. What exactly did you see? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn's expression darkened. You want details? Fine. Last week, Emily came over for lunch. We were sitting in the kitchen, just like this, when her phone buzzed. She excused herself, left it on the counter. I wasn't even going to look, but the message popped up on the screen. She leaned forward, her gaze locking with mine. It was from you, Jake. My breath hitched. Something about last night being worth the risk. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she looked away for a moment, composing herself. I thought it must be a mistake. Maybe you'd send it to the wrong person. But then, curiosity got the better of me. Evelyn reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table to me. I took notes, just in case. I stared at the paper as if it were a live grenade. Notes? Don't look so shocked, she said bitterly. You think I wouldn't document something like this? I wasn't born yesterday. With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper. Her neat handwriting filled the page, listing dates, times, and snippets of text she must have read on Emily's phone. Emily, I can't stop thinking about you. Jake, we need to be more careful. Last night was too close. I love you. I wish things were simpler. The blood drained from my face. This isn't real, I muttered. Evelyn, this is not what you think. Don't insult me, she snapped. Those are your words, aren't they? My voice trailed off. There was no point in denying it. The evidence was right there, written in her methodical hand. I've seen the way Emily looks at you, she continued, her tone softening just enough to sound more hurt than angry. I thought it was innocent at first, a wife being proud of her husband. But now I see the way you look at her, too. How long has this been going on, Jake? The question hung in the air like a guillotine. Evelyn, my mouth felt dry, my words clumsy. It's not like that. Then what is it like? She pressed. It's complicated, I repeated, though the words felt hollow even to me. Stop hiding behind that word. Evelyn's voice rose, startling me. You think this is complicated? Try sitting across from your granddaughter's husband, wondering how the hell he could betray her like this. That's complicated, Jake. I sank into the chair across from her, my head in my hands. I didn't mean for it to happen, I admitted. I don't even know how it started. Emily and we've been having problems for a while. She felt distant, and I was trying to fix things, but we just kept drifting further apart. And you thought sleeping with her grandmother's husband was the solution? I flinched at her words, the harshness of them cutting deep. No, it wasn't like that. I paused, searching for the right words. It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. Stupid doesn't even begin to cover it, she said coldly. Do you know how much this will destroy her if she finds out? She loves you, Jake. She believes in you. Her words twisted the knife of guilt already lodged deep in my chest. I'd been lying to Emily for months, convincing myself I could keep it all buried. But now, sitting here under Evelyn's unflinching scrutiny, I realized the truth was already clawing its way to the surface. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice barely audible. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. I want you to end it. Now. Completely. Whatever this is between you and Emily, it stops today. I nodded, though the weight of her demand felt unbearable. Okay. Do you mean that? she asked, her tone skeptical. Because if you don't, I will tell her everything. She deserves the truth, Jake. Even if it breaks her heart. I'll end it, I said again, firmer this time. I promise. Evelyn studied me for a long moment, her piercing gaze searching for any sign of deception. Finally, she nodded. Good. Because if you don't, this family won't survive what comes next. The warning in her voice sent a chill down my spine. The air in the kitchen remained heavy long after Evelyn's words had settled. She sat across from me, her back stiff, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as if bracing herself. I couldn't bring myself to look her in the eye anymore. She sighed, her voice quieter now, but no less sharp. You know, Jake, I've spent my entire life protecting this family, watching it grow. Emily was my first granddaughter. I held her in my arms when she was born. I promised myself I'd always look out for her, no matter what. I never wanted to hurt her, I muttered. The words felt meaningless, even as they left my mouth. And yet, here we are, Evelyn replied flatly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. I glanced at the paper she'd handed me earlier, still lying on the table like a piece of incriminating evidence. Evelyn, why are you telling me this now? I asked finally. If you've known for a while, why didn't you say something sooner? She hesitated, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. I had to be sure, she admitted. At first I thought I might be imagining things. But then the signs became harder to ignore. The texts, the looks, the excuses Emily gave for her late nights. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Her eyes met mine, filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. But it's not just about Emily. It's about the kind of man you are, Jake. The kind of man I thought you were. The words stung more than I expected. Evelyn had always been the one who believed in me, who welcomed me into the family with open arms when Emily and I got married. To see her faith in me crumble was unbearable. I know I've let you down, I said, my voice thick with regret. But I'm going to fix this. I swear. Her lips tightened, and she looked away, her gaze settling on the window. It's not that simple. Fixing things isn't always possible, Jake. Sometimes the damage is too deep. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. Do you know why I didn't tell Emily right away? Because I wanted to believe you'd have the decency to come clean on your own. I kept hoping you'd end it, that you'd see what you were risking. But you didn't. The weight of her disappointment was suffocating. Evelyn stood abruptly, crossing the room to the sink. She stared out at her backyard, where the swing set Emily used to play on as a child still stood, rusted and worn. You're not the first man in this family to betray someone, she said almost to herself. The words caught me off guard. What do you mean? She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. Emily's grandfather. My husband. He had an affair, too. Years ago. I found out the same way I found out about you and Emily. A stray message, careless words. And just like you, he promised to end it. My mouth went dry. Did he? I asked cautiously. Her lips curled into a bitter smile. For a while. But the damage was already done. The trust between us was gone, and we could never get it back. We stayed married, but it was never the same. Her words hung heavy in the room, a grim reminder of the consequences of betrayal. I'm not him, I said, more to myself than to her. I won't let it end like that. Evelyn's gaze softened slightly, but the sadness in her eyes remained. I hope you mean that, Jake. For Emily's sake. She moved back to the table, sitting down with a sigh. You need to decide what kind of man you want to be. Because right now, you're standing on the edge of a cliff. And if you don't step back, you're going to drag this entire family down with you. Her words echoed in my mind, a stark warning of the path I was on. The sound of the front door opening interrupted the tense moment. Evelyn and I both froze as footsteps echoed through the hallway. Grandma, are you home? It was Emily. Evelyn shot me a look, her eyes widening in alarm. Not a word, she hissed under her breath. I nodded, my heart pounding as Emily appeared in the doorway, her smile fading slightly when she saw the tension in the room. Hey, she said, her gaze flicking between us. What's going on? Just catching up, Evelyn said smoothly, her voice betraying none of the turmoil that had filled the room moments earlier. Jake stopped by for some tea. Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Tea? You hate tea, Jake? I forced a smile. Your grandma makes an exception. Earl Grey, right? Evelyn shot me a warning glance, but said nothing. Emily walked over to the table, placing a hand on my shoulder. You okay? You look tense. I'm fine, I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. Just work stuff? She nodded, though her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer. Well, I'm glad you're here. I was hoping we could talk about Thanksgiving plans. Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I think that's enough for today, she said, her tone brisk. Jake, thank you for coming. Emily, we'll talk later about Thanksgiving. Emily looked confused but didn't argue. I stood as well, grateful for the excuse to leave. As I walked past Evelyn, she caught my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. She leaned in close, her voice low enough that only I could hear. Remember what I said, Jake. End it, or I will. The threat was clear, and as I left the house with Emily by my side, I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully constructed world was on the verge of collapsing. The drive home from Evelyn's house was suffocating. Emily hummed along to a song on the radio, blissfully unaware of the storm swirling inside me. Her hand rested lightly on my knee, a small gesture of affection that suddenly felt like a vice tightening around my guilt. You were quiet back there, she said, glancing at me. Everything okay? Yeah, I lied. Just tired. She gave me a skeptical look, but didn't push. I kept my eyes on the road, my grip on the steering wheel tightening as I replayed Evelyn's words in my head. End it, or I will. When we got home, Emily disappeared into the bedroom to change, leaving me alone in the living room. The silence was deafening. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of the mess I'd created. I had to end it. Evelyn was right. There was no other way. But ending it wouldn't erase what I'd done. It wouldn't undo the betrayal or the lies. And if Evelyn decided to tell Emily anyway, Jake? I looked up to see Emily standing in the doorway, her expression concerned. She wore one of my old college sweatshirts, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. She looked so familiar, so comfortable, and yet all I could see was the weight of the secrets between us. You sure you're okay? She asked, coming to sit beside me. You've been acting off lately. For a moment, I considered telling her everything. I could lay it all out. The texts, the moments of weakness, the guilt that had been eating away at me for months. Maybe she'd understand. Maybe she'd forgive me. But the thought of her face twisting in betrayal, of her packing a bag and walking out the door, was too much to bear. I'm fine, I said, forcing a smile. Just work stress. You know how it is? She nodded slowly, but didn't look convinced. Okay, well, let me know if you want to talk about it. Her kindness only made the guilt worse. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, I sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the darkened yard. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Are you awake? The text from Emily lit up the screen like a beacon. Not my wife. Emily, the other Emily. The one I had crossed every boundary with. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I couldn't keep doing this. I had to stop it once and for all. But as much as I wanted to, I couldn't bring myself to type the words. Instead, I stared at the message until the screen went dark. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Emily humming in the kitchen. She was making breakfast, her usual Saturday routine, as if everything were perfectly normal. Morning, she said brightly when I walked in. Coffee's ready. Thanks, I muttered, grabbing a mug. My hands were shaking slightly, and I hoped she wouldn't notice. As I sat down at the table, Emily placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of me. She leaned down, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. You seem better this morning, she said. I'm glad. I forced a smile, my chest tightening. She didn't deserve this. The day passed in a blur of small talk and errands, but the weight of Evelyn's ultimatum hung over me like a storm cloud. By the time evening rolled around, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. Emily had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long week at work. I sat in the living room, staring at my phone, trying to summon the courage to make the call. Finally, I dialed the number. It rang twice before she picked up. Hey. Emily's voice was soft, almost hesitant. I wasn't sure if you'd call. We need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Whatever this is between us, it has to stop. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I figured you'd say that, she said finally. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of pain. Your wife's grandmother got to you, didn't she? My breath caught. What do you mean? She called me, Emily said flatly. Last night. She told me everything. Well, everything she knows. My stomach dropped. What did she say? That she found the messages. That she's giving you one last chance to fix things. And that if I didn't stay away from you, she'd tell your wife. The room felt like it was spinning. Evelyn hadn't just confronted me. She'd gone straight to the source. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I know, Emily said quietly. But it did. And now we're here. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Goodbye, Jake, she said finally. The line went dead, and I was left staring at the phone, the reality of what I'd done sinking in. As I sat there, the sound of footsteps made me look up. Emily, my wife, stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Who are you talking to? She asked. My blood ran cold. Emily's question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. She stood in the dim light of the hallway, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I fumbled for an answer, my mind racing. Work, I lied, my voice tight. Just wrapping up some last-minute stuff. She raised an eyebrow. At midnight? On a Saturday? Yeah, I said, forcing a chuckle that came out sounding strangled. One of the guys needed clarification on a report. You know how it is? Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she stared at me for a moment longer before nodding slowly. Okay, I'm going back to bed. Don't stay up too late. Sure, I said, relief washing over me as she turned and walked down the hallway. But even as she disappeared into the bedroom, I could feel the weight of her suspicion lingering. The next day, I tried to act normal. I helped Emily clean the house, ran errands, and even suggested we grab lunch at her favorite diner. But she wasn't buying it. You've been weird all weekend, she said as we sat across from each other in a vinyl booth, plates of untouched burgers between us. I'm fine, I insisted, avoiding her gaze. Are you? She asked, leaning forward. Because you're acting like you're hiding something. Is it work? Is it us? What's going on, Jake? Her directness caught me off guard, and for a moment I considered coming clean. But the image of her face crumpling in heartbreak was enough to silence me. It's just work stress, I said, forcing a reassuring smile. I promise. She didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. That evening, I found myself alone in the living room again, replaying the conversation in my head. Emily was too perceptive. She'd figure it out eventually. Evelyn's ultimatum had bought me time, but the clock was ticking. I was still grappling with my thoughts when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting another message from work or a random spam call. But the name on the screen made my stomach drop. It was Evelyn. I hesitated before answering, my pulse quickening. Hello. Jake, she said, her tone clipped and urgent. I need to see you. Now. Is everything okay? I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Just come over, she said, and bring Emily. The line went dead before I could ask any more questions. I told Emily that Evelyn wanted to discuss Thanksgiving plans. She didn't seem entirely convinced, but agreed to come along. The drive to Evelyn's house was tense, the silence between us broken only by the occasional hum of the radio. When we arrived, Evelyn was waiting for us on the front porch, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She waved us inside without a word, leading us into the living room. What's this about, Grandma? Emily asked, her tone cautious. Evelyn gestured for us to sit. Once we were settled, she took a deep breath, her gaze flicking between the two of us. Emily, she began, there's something I need to tell you. My heart pounded in my chest as Evelyn spoke, her voice steady but laced with emotion. You know I love you, and I've always tried to protect you, even when it meant making hard choices. Emily frowned, her confusion evident. What's going on? Evelyn's eyes shifted to me, her gaze hardening. Jake and I had a conversation yesterday about things he's been hiding from you. My stomach turned to lead. Evelyn, I started, but she silenced me with a sharp look. Jake has been unfaithful, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. Emily froze, her eyes widening in shock. What? I didn't want to believe it at first, Evelyn continued, ignoring me. But the evidence was there. The texts, the late nights, the lies. I confronted him, and he admitted it. Emily turned to me, her expression a mix of disbelief and betrayal. Jake, is this true? I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jake, she said again, her voice trembling. Tell me the truth. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I tried to find the words. Yes, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. It's true. Emily stared at me, her face pale. Oh, my throat tightened. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, she snapped, her voice breaking. Who was it? Evelyn stepped in before I could answer. It's done, Emily. That's what matters now. He ended it. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You knew about this, Grandma? You knew and didn't tell me. I was trying to protect you, Evelyn said, her voice heavy with guilt. I didn't want to hurt you. The room erupted into chaos as Emily sobbed. Evelyn tried to comfort her, and I sat frozen, unable to move or speak. Every word, every tear, was a reminder of the destruction I had caused. Finally, Emily stood, her face streaked with tears. I need to get out of here, she said, grabbing her coat. Emily, wait, I started, but she cut me off with a glare that could have shattered glass. Don't, she said. Don't say another word. She stormed out of the house, leaving Evelyn and me in stunned silence. Evelyn turned to me, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. I warned you, Jake, she said quietly. I told you what would happen. I nodded, unable to argue. She was right. And now, there was no going back. The door slammed behind Emily, the sound echoing through Evelyn's house like a gunshot. I stood frozen in the living room, staring at the space where she had just been. My legs felt heavy, my body disconnected, as if the gravity of what had happened hadn't fully hit me yet. Evelyn broke the silence. You should go after her. I shook my head, my voice hollow. She doesn't want to see me right now. Then let her go, Evelyn said sharply, her tone colder than I'd ever heard it. But don't think this is over, Jake. You've shattered her trust, and trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. Her words hit me like a blow, but I couldn't muster a response. What could I say? She was right. I left Evelyn's house soon after, the silence in my car on the drive home feeling heavier than the confrontation itself. Emily's absence was palpable when I stepped into the house. The jacket she always left draped over the chair was gone, her favorite coffee mug still sitting on the counter like a ghost of her presence. I sank onto the couch, staring at my phone. There were no texts, no calls, no indication of where she had gone. The thought of her walking out of my life for good was a cold, sharp knife twisting in my chest. How did it come to this? The next few days were a blur. Emily didn't come home, and she wasn't answering her phone. Evelyn called once to check on me, but her voice was distant, detached. She wasn't calling to comfort me. She was checking to see if I'd done more damage. I went to work, barely able to focus, the weight of everything hanging over me. Coworkers noticed my distracted state, but I brushed off their questions with vague excuses about being tired or stressed. Every night, I came home to an empty house. Every night, I sat on the couch waiting for a text, a call, anything. But nothing came. It was Evelyn who finally called again, nearly a week later. She's here, she said without preamble. Emily? I asked, sitting up straight. She's staying with me, Evelyn confirmed. She needs space, Jake. You need to respect that. Can I talk to her? No, she said firmly. Not yet. She's not ready. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration boiling over. Evelyn, I need to make this right. And how exactly do you plan to do that? She asked, her voice sharp. Do you think one conversation is going to fix this? Do you think an apology will erase what you've done? I don't know, I admitted. But I have to try. Evelyn sighed, her tone softening just a fraction. Jake, you need to give her time. She's hurt, betrayed, and she has every right to be. If you really care about her, you'll wait until she's ready to face you. Her words stung, but I knew she was right. Will you tell her I'm sorry? I asked quietly. I will, Evelyn said, but don't expect that to be enough. She hung up, leaving me alone with my thoughts once again. The days turned into weeks, and the silence stretched on. Emily didn't return, and Evelyn remained the only link between us. She called occasionally, updating me on how Emily was doing without giving away too much. She's still processing, she said during one call. Don't push her, Jake. Let her come to you when she's ready. But as the days dragged on, doubt began to creep in. What if she never came back? What if I'd broken something that couldn't be fixed? It was nearly a month later when Emily finally reached out. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, when my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen, and my heart leapt into my throat. Can we talk? I stared at the message, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew this was my chance, maybe my only chance, to make things right. Of course, I replied. She suggested meeting at a park near Evelyn's house, a neutral place where we could talk without the weight of home pressing down on us. When I arrived, Emily was already there, sitting on a bench by the lake. She looked different, thinner, paler, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. But there was also a strength in her posture, a resolve I hadn't seen before. Hi, I said, approaching cautiously. She nodded but didn't smile. Hi. I sat down beside her, leaving a careful distance between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. Why, Jake? Her voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that made me flinch. I don't know, I admitted. I was stupid, selfish. I made a terrible mistake, and I don't have an excuse. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the water. You hurt me. You broke something I thought was unbreakable. I know, I said, my throat tightening. And I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. I just need you to give me a chance. Emily turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. I don't know if I can, Jake. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I nodded. I understand, but I'm not going to give up on us. She looked away, her shoulders sagging under the weight of everything that had happened. I need time and space. I'm not saying it's over, but I can't just go back to the way things were. I'll wait, I said. As long as it takes. She didn't respond, and we sat in silence, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees the only noise between us. As I watched her walk away, I felt the full weight of my actions crashing down on me. There were no guarantees, no promises that things would ever be okay again. But for the first time, I felt a sliver of hope.